With more than a decade of experience growing an e-commerce agency and hosting multiple top podcasts, this week's guest, Khloe Thomas, shares her proven system for securing sponsorships, avoiding guest problems, and owning your own platform. If you want to build an audience of raving fans and create a sustainable podcast business, Khloe reveals her secrets on how she quit her 9-to-5 to podcast full-time and make a consistent six-figure income. Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, incurable creators. Today I'm joined by Khloe Thomas. Khloe has authored the best-selling book, E-Commerce Marketing. She's also managed a marketing agency for more than 10 years. Since 2015, she's hosted the E-Commerce Master Plan podcast, and since 2020, she's hosted the Keep Optimizing podcast, which has allowed her to become a full-time podcaster. Thank you so much for joining us today, Khloe.
Brilliant to be here, Nathan. Thank you so much for inviting me onto your show.
So today we want to talk a little bit about guest management techniques. We want to talk about sponsorships, and we want to talk about e-commerce for podcasters. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about your journey, your story to become a full-time podcaster?
Yeah, sure. It's been quite a long one. Which all started back in about 2014 when I was trying to solve a couple of problems in the agency I had at the time. One was that e-commerce people rarely leave their desk. They don't do networking. So we were trying to find a way to talk to them. And then another was that I was having lots of off-the-record conversations that I wanted to put on the record. So someone suggested podcasting. I was like, that sounds interesting. Got a little bit obsessed with Entrepreneur on Fire, as I'm sure many have.
I love that show. I love John Lee Dumas.
Such a good show. John and Kate are amazing. And I even got someone to download and create a spreadsheet of all their monthly accounts so I could try and work it. I went properly overboard. So when I started it, the aim was to become a sponsored podcast. But it took, I think, about 3 years before we started getting sponsorship money. So there was a big lead up to getting to that point. And then it wasn't until I had the two podcasts that I could really go kind of full-time podcaster and give up the consulting and give up the other elements. So these days I sell advertising across emails and the podcasts. And that's pretty much what I do day in, day out. Yeah. So I think that classifies me as a full-time podcaster.
Yeah. You're living the life that a lot of podcasters would like to be living. And that's interesting that it took you 3 years to be able to start selling sponsorships. That's not abnormal at all. Can you tell us, how many followers did you finally have? And tell us the story of selling your first sponsorship and how did you do it?
Oh man, you're asking me to kind of crawl back in the memory banks now. I couldn't tell you what number we were at the point where we sold. One of the reasons we didn't sell early days was because I didn't want to sell a sponsorship that was below the price at which it was worth me bothering to have a sponsor, if that makes sense. There's workload involved. There's you ask any podcast listener, would they rather listen to a podcast with or without ads? And they'd rather listen to one without ads. So there's a slight downgrade in audience perception. So it's until I can make this much per episode, which I think was only 100 quid, so it was about $120 or something. Until I can make that much per episode, I'm not interested in selling. So I held off for quite a while. I mean, at that point, the easy, small selling routes of Podcorn and those marketplaces didn't exist anyway. So I was waiting until that happened, and I was waiting until my industry was interested in podcast advertising. So my advertisers are software businesses who want to get in front of an e-commerce audience, and the podcast advertising budget just didn't exist because our industry wasn't yet there. So I was kind of waiting for that to take off. And when the stars aligned and those two things happened, we started doing the sponsorships. We had, I think it was 2 years where we just were selling out all our space. So then that's one of the reasons why I created the second podcast, because I had people who wanted to sponsor a podcast and I'd run out of podcasts that could be sponsored. So I created the second podcast to deal with that problem or take advantage of that problem. I suppose. Did that answer your question, Nathan? I feel like I went off on a tangent there.
It did. What are the 3 most important things that a podcaster needs to know to be successful with podcast sponsorships?
I think one is that, certainly in my space, is that don't assume the person wanting to sponsor the podcast understands what podcast sponsorship actually is. So I think I have a lot of people who sponsor for the first time. So I handhold them through the process, or they've sponsored on someone else's show but didn't really get it, and they then come to me. So I do a lot of handholding during the process of helping them work out how to brief me for their ads, of helping them work out what the numbers might look like, helping them work out how to track the responses. I don't expect them to know that. I help them through it because I want them to be successful so they come back. So don't assume they all know what they're doing, because they very much don't. But that's not a bad thing. Secondly, I think know your industry. So I don't even know what CPM I'm charging. I'm not interested in CPM. It's not how my industry buys. So in my space, I charge a flat fee per month to each sponsor, way ahead of industry published CPMs, because my audience are worth more to my sponsors than they would be on a generic podcast. So it's kind of understanding your niche or your niche, and then understanding what someone's willing to pay to get in front of that. And the only way to work it out is to just keep rising the price and see if people are still willing to pay it, and see like you would with any other product. So understanding how much your audience is willing to pay. If I was doing, I don't know, a keto podcast or a vegan podcast, my price per episode would be a lot lower, but my audience per episode should be a lot higher, if that makes sense. So I think you need to understand the space you're in and price accordingly. Otherwise, you might be not managing to get any sponsors, or you might be losing money that you could be charging to sponsors. And then I think the other one is don't be scared to let space not be sponsored. So sponsorship's a perishable product. Once the episode's out there, it's, within 2 days of being live, it's lost, 60% of its sponsorship potential. So whilst you do have the technology that enables you to sell the back catalogue, it's not worth anywhere near as much as the new episode that's going live. So I think the third thing would be not to devalue because of the perishable nature of the product. So I could do as we're chatting right now, in less than 10 days, a month goes live, which I currently have no sponsor for. It's too late for me to find a sponsor and to do it properly. I could send crisis emails out to everyone going, I've got an opportunity, make me an offer. How low can we go? But that would devalue the brand and would lead to people waiting around for a last minute ditch opportunity. So I'll fill it with some affiliate advertising, or I'll fill it with advertising for something that we're doing instead. So don't be scared to let the occasional month or the occasional episode go out without paying sponsors in order to keep your price points for future episodes.
Yeah, that's great advice. What are some of the biggest mistakes people make with their podcast sponsorship? How do we avoid them?
Overselling. Podcast sponsorship it's hard to track. It's hard to prove the impact on it, especially when you're selling B2B sponsorship packages. So my audience are business listeners. They listen on their personal phone and they take action on their work computer. That is nigh on impossible to track, even with the great gains that have been made in podcast advertising tracking. So don't oversell, because you do want people to come back and sponsor the following year. So if you're like, yeah, man, these people are willing to pay double what I normally charge, it's probably not a good thing, The second one is not to have packages. So I'm almost going to contradict myself here. So we have a basic level of sponsorship, and then we have a better level of sponsorship. On the e-commerce master plan podcast, we have 2 sponsors per episode, and you can pay double to be the exclusive sponsor. And some people are totally happy to pay double to be the only sponsor in an episode. And I love them. They're brilliant. They halve my workload and they pay me double. On the Keep Optimizing podcast, we only take 1 sponsor in each episode. So in that place, to create packages, we have a basic package, which you just get the sponsorship. And then we have a higher value package where we add in some email sends to make the a higher price point, which not many people take the higher price point, but it does two things for me. One, it flags the fact I've got email advertising as well to them. And secondly, it makes the basic package seem better value for money because it's a lower price point. So it gives them something to compare. Well, I think those are probably the two big ones. And I guess don't be afraid to say no to someone who's a really irrelevant sponsor for your business. I suppose that would be the other one. Yeah.
Interesting. What makes someone an irrelevant sponsor?
So our shows are heavily about e-commerce success, but we're also very interested in sustainability and, saving the planet and all that kind of good stuff. So if Barclays Bank came along, who are one of the worst in the world for giving money to oil exploration and gas exploration, and they asked us to sponsor the podcast, it would be a flat no, because my listeners would be like, weren't you saying how excited you were about the fact you've just moved all your business banking from them last month on LinkedIn and now you're taking money from them? That's someone I would definitely turn down. And then I know that our audience aren't really FBA sellers, which is a niche part of e-commerce. They're not really dropship sellers. So I probably wouldn't, 9 times out of 10, I'd say no to those people if they wanted to sponsor the podcast, because they're just not going to get a good result. And my audience is going to be like, well, that's a really boring ad. Skip on to next podcast.
That's right. So it probably comes down to, we don't want to take ads that hurt our credibility, right?
Yeah, credibility.
Where they don't trust the messaging that's coming from us, or they don't trust our integrity because of the money we're taking.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about guest management for a little bit. What are the most important things that podcasters need to know to effectively manage relationships with their guests?
That it's a lot of work. I think it's so much work. So much work. Systems are your friends. Spreadsheets, forms. I
agree.
Yeah, we have 2 major problems with finding guests. Is it okay if I talk around those, Nathan? Because I think that's probably where I can offer the most help. The first one is that on the E-commerce Master Plan podcast, our audience are people running e-commerce businesses. Our guests are people running e-commerce businesses. They have very little to sell each other. There's a chance someone might want to buy their soap or their clothing, but there's not a lot in it for the guests who come on the show. We have to be very understanding of that. I think we must invite like 10 people for every guest who actually turns up on the show, something in that region. We have to assume they will cancel last minute because something more important comes up. Because I'm still like unbelievably amazed they're willing to come and talk on, give up an hour of their time to be on the podcast. So we're very generous with them rebooking and cancelling. Like this week, as I'm talking to you, I had 4 booked. 2 have already cancelled. 1 didn't turn up, but apologised an hour later. And another one emailed me that morning and said, I can't do it. I'm rebooking. So you have to go, I guess the lesson from it is you need to know your guests and understand your guests. If I went, well, you failed to tell, you're never allowed to book again, then I would have nobody to interview on my podcast. So understand where you fit in their priorities and be amenable to that. And also within that, you have to kind of book well in advance. A podcast is a hungry beast. You have to keep feeding it an episode. So we run minimum 3 weeks ahead of when the episodes go out, because then it doesn't matter if they cancel, because we're bulking up the episodes at the time of year where they want to record. Because I need to say, e-commerce guests, they don't want to record in November and December because they're way too busy. So we bulk over the summer, we bulk at the beginning of the year to carry us through those periods when they don't want to record. So that's our number one guest challenge, is understanding our guests and working around them. And then the other one is, I suspect you get this too, Nathan, as many of your listeners do, the hundreds of people who ask to be on our show. Like, so many people ask to be on the show. And when I'm low energy, I'm not very polite in saying no. And when I'm high energy, I want to say a really, really nice low. So one way or another, my energy was screwing up our responses to these things. So we now have Google Forms to capture that information so it's in the right place. Because, you could be the person I most want on the show, but I will probably have forgotten that you spoke to me about it because there'll have been 10 other people this week asking to be on the show. So I need you to put your information into the form so we've got it when we're ready to invite you. And we have a separate form for each podcast. And they operate both as kind of like a holding cell for the useful people. So when I need to book the people, I can go and there's all the eager people in my spreadsheet with the right information. I know what they want to talk about and all the rest of it. It's also a really good filtering tool. So the e-commerce master plan podcast in particular we pretty much only interview brands. 99% of the people who fill in the form, despite the big letters across the page that say, if you are supplier side, do not apply, 99% of the people who fill in that form are supplier side guests. So it enables me to very quickly and easily filter them. And it's amazing how many of them think if they go to the drop down and they pick, I am a retailer, I will think they're a retailer. It's like, do you honestly think that's not going to work? So we also use the forms to filter and to make managing that process an awful lot easier. So, and then the other key thing to that is I have a template that has the standard response that everyone who emails me or LinkedIn messages me and says, can I come on your podcast gets, which gives them who we're looking for, why we're looking for them, gives them the link to apply to both podcasts and the webinar series that we have as well. So it's really helpful, but it means when I'm in a bad mood, they still get the helpful reply. They don't get the why when I want you on your podcast reply. So it makes my life an awful lot easier too.
I love it. Systems and automation. Any other core secrets you want to share?
I suppose one thing which I have forever rankled with and ummed and ahed about in the world of guest is whether I could manage to outsource the bit of the guest management, which is from invitation to turning up on the show. And I find that to be such an important part of how I build the content, selecting who to invite, through to building some level of relationship with people before we jump on the recording. I haven't been able to outsource that yet or automate that yet. So I think there's the tip from this bit. I was going, why is she telling us about her problem? The tip is I think you keep unautomated the bits which add the value, but don't be afraid to automate the bits which don't add value. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Don't automate everything. Keep a human touch in the parts that really matter. Love it. Okay, talk to us about your secret sauce. What is the most important thing that has brought you success in podcasting?
Probably not a surprise for your audience, but it's being organized. I don't know if you find this too, Nathan, but a lot of people who are zany and creative, who I love people who are zany and creative, a lot of them think they'll be great at podcasting. But podcasting is 80% organization. If you want to get an episode out every week or a brilliant series out, if you're doing it series style, you have to be organized. And if you want to take that up to, sponsorship, so you are beholden to somebody because you've got to deliver for them, you need systems and processes to make it happen. If you're going to start running 2 podcasts and have time to do other things, you're going to need a team, so they're going to need to be organized. And the systems and processes bit, yes, you can outsource it. But for me, it's so intrinsically part of the creative process. I really don't think I wouldn't be where I am with it all if I didn't have that organizational skill set to bring to the party.
Yeah, it's such a complicated process. My episodes have 22 different steps to it, right? Each episode has 22 different steps it has to go through, and you just miss one step and you miss the whole episode.
Yeah, and the way it goes backwards and forwards between people and making sure that when it goes this, that, oh yeah, I'm going to have to count my steps now. I don't know how many we have.
So when we did our pre-interview, we talked about your number one area of expertise, which is e-commerce marketing. And I suggested that maybe we could talk about e-commerce marketing for podcasters. And you didn't think that would be a very effective conversation. Tell me why you don't think e-commerce is an effective strategy for podcasters.
I guess it's because the type of e-commerce I get involved in is it's the Shopify world. It's the physical products shifting to a store. It's high street retailers, the big sellers, bit of marketplaces stuff as well. So the Amazons, the eBays, TikTok marketplace, that kind of thing. And it just, as someone who'd love to talk podcasting to all of them, so much of the time they are just not interested in podcasting. We occasionally put out an episode about how to create a brand podcast tumbleweed. They're just not interested in it. So in my head, the two worlds don't really combine. So Nathan, why in your head, why am I wrong in thinking they don't combine? Where do they combine well?
Yeah, in my mind, it feels like those two should combine, but you're right. To a lot of people in the e-commerce world, they don't think of podcasting, but I think podcasting is one of the best things an e-commerce marketer, an e-commerce entrepreneur can do. Because let's say I had a product about gardening. Let's say I love gardening and I sold some gardening products. I'm pretty dependent upon Google and Facebook and those other platforms to sell. And as they increase their prices, as they change the rules, as they decide that my product doesn't fit their political persuasion or something this month, like I could lose everything. I could lose, my ability to acquire customers. It feels like I'm building a skyscraper on land that I don't own, right? And it's kind of scary for me to have that kind of dependence. Obviously, we should use it while it's there, but I've seen people that have been very dependent. I have a friend named John Rampton who sold a little kitchen device. It's called a scrap trap, and you connect it to your kitchen counter. You cut up your fruits and vegetables, you scrape them into the scrap trap, and you throw them away. It's just an easy way to get rid of the scraps when you're cooking. And he was making $92 million a year selling that product on Amazon. Okay, $92 million of annual revenue. And what do you think Amazon did?
They got annoyed with him, and that was game over.
They realized that someone was selling this little teeny plastic device making $92 million a year. And so they went and made their own product and put their own product on Amazon. And what do you think they did once they had their product on Amazon?
Weirdly enough, it probably became Amazon's choice, and it probably appeared higher in the things. Yeah, Amazon
Absolutely.
have a whole load of ways to destroy you if you're successful on that platform. Yeah.
Yep. They made theirs first, and regardless what he did, he couldn't beat them. And then they removed him completely, and he lost $92 million a year of revenue because he built his business dependent upon someone else's platform. So I think the biggest reason that e-commerce players need a podcast is they need to own their own platform. They need to own the land where they're building their skyscraper. And what is that land? The land is the list. It's the contact information of the buyers, of the people interested in your topic. It's the permission to market to them. It's a relationship with those people. It's the value you've provided to them where they get to know you, like you, and trust you. So I'll give you another example. Friend of mine, name's David Gilmore. He likes to garden and likes to be prepared. And so he did a show about gardening and preparedness, and he has 260,000 followers right now. And so he has more control over his list. And now he goes and finds these great products and he sells them into his list of followers, right? And feels like he controls a lot of his destiny now. I could go through and tell you stories of different products that he's found and sold and made a lot of money off of. But the point is, when you have a list of people, you own this land and they get to know you, like you, and trust you. It's almost like you can prescribe to them instead of having to sell to them as well, right? If they know you and they trust you, you find this great product, you just have to say, hey, here's this amazing product that I found and I love it. You guys should buy it, instead of just having to be an e-commerce seller and convince people that don't know you and trust you. I don't know. It feels like a much more stable and secure business model than just being at the whim of some platform that changes their rules whenever they feel like it. What do you think?
There's a huge trend in e-commerce at the moment, because certainly in the UK and increasingly reaching this point in the US as well, where the e-commerce land grab is over. Like you could just do this and you'll make huge amounts of money, like your friend did on Amazon, like many have done with Facebook ads and so forth. All this kind of like easy wins is going, and we're now becoming a much more competitive space where you're fighting against another e-commerce brand because the influx of people into the market is just dried up. So as a result of that, we talk a lot more about building connection and relationship with your customers in terms of emotional connection, storytelling, and all this kind of thing. And And always throughout e-commerce, a trend has been get the email address, own the list, and so forth. I think podcasting is definitely a way to build that connection. And so long as you're saying, "Oh, sign up to our email list, here's a reason to do this," then you can build that piece that you own. But I would throw back at you, Nathan, podcasting is equally as risky, or almost equally as risky, as Amazon selling, because we're at the whim of Apple and Spotify, YouTube if you use YouTube, and what their algorithms choose to do with our content, which is the way which Apple's now evolving. I don't know about you, but when I get those emails coming through from Apple Podcasts, update for podcasts, I'm like, oh, what have they done now? What have I now got to do? What have I now got to change? And the whole way in which they tracked download numbers with the iOS 17 update last year, that I'm sure has given many, looking at what's happened to my stats as a result of that. Personally, I'm like, brilliant. My stats are now more accurate, more representative of people actually listening. This is a good thing. I've now got more reasonable stuff to look at. But I'm sure a lot of people have seen some major drops that have got them quite scared. So I find in some ways being a podcaster is a little bit more dangerous. Yes, we own our RSS feed, but the platforms we're distributing on, we don't have quite so much control of.
I agree with you. If we are just dependent upon third-party platforms as a podcaster, we're in the same position as an e-commerce seller. We're dependent. And my proposition is, let's own our own platforms. And the people that follow us, every time we do a podcast, let's give away a lead magnet. Let's give away an ebook. Let's give away a mini course. Let's give away something. And as those people sign up for those lead magnets, let's get their email addresses. Let's get their contact information. Let's get them on an email list to where we can send them a weekly newsletter or a monthly newsletter. And even if Apple chooses to drop us in their listings, we still have their email address. We can still email them every single week with that episode and reach our fans and get them to listen to our show. And they don't even have to listen to it on Apple. We can get them to come to our website and listen to it. There's other ways we can send them the links and not be 100% dependent on Apple. Let's use everyone else's platform. Let's use the 20 different podcasting platforms. Let's use Amazon to sell our e-commerce. Let's use Facebook and Medium for our blogs. Let's use every other platform to pull people, but let's use that to expand our reach. But then let's use lead magnets to pull them back so they're on our list, and then we can reach them every week, right? And regardless of any platform deplatforming us or changing their algorithm, we still have our list of users, and we've built some sustainability that's our land we own. Do you agree with that, or am I missing something?
Totally agree. Standard strategy, get the email. The only thing you own in the digital space is the email address.
And I guess we could do it with a phone number, and maybe we could text them to a certain degree, but I get annoyed with that quickly.
Me too. And it's worth saying that podcasters on Apple and people selling products on Amazon, there's a lot more wiggle room for those of us who are podcasters than those who are selling product on Amazon. When you can't even ask for the email addresses. Pretty much, there's some really sneaky routes you can do with packaging and things, but really, really hard. Whereas we can say whatever we like in our podcasts, so we can. That's right. Can get that. So,
That's right.
But yeah, going back to your gardening example though, I can totally see how if you have the right content to create a store that sells the products you recommend, big enough audience and so forth, you could kind of almost graduate from a straightforward influencer scenario where you're getting a commission to a point where you're running your own store and building a monetization stream that way. So yeah, I can really see how
one of the overlap. Monetization strategies that a podcaster could leverage to become a full-time podcaster like you.
Yeah. Well, I spend too much time around business podcasters, you see, and we have nothing to put in a physical store. So
yeah, that makes sense. Okay, what is the hardest thing, the most challenging thing you've had to go through as a podcaster, and how did you get over it, get through it?
So hardest thing as a podcaster is probably when you don't have anything to put out. That's the nightmare. So, but it's led to some quite creative and interesting things that have ended up happening on our podcast. So, and some really cool things too. So we had mix mash episodes where we picked bits from previous episodes and put them together. Hugely time-consuming way to fill the space. Or we've repurposed webinars that we've done and put that out as a podcast episode. Or I've just done a monologue about something I feel like ranting about for an episode. Sometimes, if anyone is listening to this who listens to my show, sometimes those are planned, but they can also be Khloe's get out of jail free card. Oh my God. The other one, the other solution to that we found on Keep Optimizing, which I actually deployed this morning. So on Keep Optimizing, just to make things harder for myself, we do a different marketing topic each month. So there are some really hard and fast deadlines. And this morning's was, I need an email guest. They have to record next week. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Otherwise, we are going to go dead, or we're going to have Khloe waffling about email for an hour, which I'm perfectly capable of doing, but it's not what the audience really wants to hear. So we've now got a template for we need a last minute guest. I've been let down. I need someone to record by the end of last week. I'm emailing this to 4 different people. The first person who books gets the guest slot. So it just it has so much more impact than me inviting 4 people. If I send that to 4 people, today's are sent out, someone had booked within half an hour to record and had put the earliest date to record on. I'm like, thank you, Hannah. And she's someone who'll be a brilliant guest. And then someone else had replied going, oh, my business partner could do this. He'll get back to you tomorrow. I'm like, too late, dude. Space is gone. It kind of almost makes lemons out of lemonade, that one. So that is with a special booking link that has last minute space only in that week. And then the second it goes, I go in and I change the text on the booking. So sorry, it's gone. So yeah, the most difficult thing is when you don't have someone booked and you need someone booked. And that's how we deal with it on Keep Optimizing. On an e-commerce master plan. It's all about just doing an awful lot of bookings is the way to do that, and then get a bit creative sometimes.
I have loved this interview today, Khloe. Thank you for all the value you've shared with our audience. If they've enjoyed it like I have, and they would like to learn more about your book and products and services, and your show, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Sure. Well, you'll find everything I'm up to at ecommercemasterplan.com. That's the home of our biggest podcast, the e-commerce master plan podcast. And if you want to get in contact with me, LinkedIn's probably the right place to go. I'm a LinkedIn top retail voice. Still don't really understand how that happened, but I love it. So yeah, just search for me on LinkedIn and you'll find me and get in contact there.
Thank you very much, Khloe. Appreciate you sharing your time and your wisdom and your value with our audience today.
Thanks for having me on the show. And I hope some of what I've shared will help at least one of your listeners.
Absolutely. It's definitely helped me. Here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, it took Khloe 3 years to start selling sponsorships on her podcast because she wanted to hold out for rates that made it worthwhile. Number 2, know your niche audience value. Khloe charges way above general market rates because of her highly targeted, high-value audience that is worth more to sponsors. Number 3, let sponsor slots go unsold rather than sell at a discount. Sponsorships are perishable, so it's better not to devalue by panic discounting at the last minute. Number 4, have clear sponsorship packages and pricing tiers. This signals value and makes basic packages seem more attractive. Number 5, guest management is very labor intensive. Be ultra organized with systems, plan for frequent cancellations, and book very far in advance. Number 6, the key to podcast success is being ruthlessly organized. Creativity is secondary to planning. And finally, number 7, you must constantly work to own your audience by capturing emails and moving them off platforms, just like in e-commerce. If you're looking for a great all-in-one podcasting platform with more than 35 integrated modules to save you a ton of time, I recommend you check out podup.com, where you can get a free trial of this platform that can help you create, grow, and monetize your business around a podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode. I wish you success in building your platform that you own.